Hey guys, welcome back. Today's another installment of the 200 Years or Perfectly Designed series. Ever since we had Zeri and Glass released back to back within the span of like a month, the rest of late winter, early spring was quiet in either new additions or reworks. Finally though, we have a new champion in the works, and she's scheduled to come out on version 12.11. I gotta say, Riot, you're taking an awfully big gamble on releasing a Void champion of all things right after the durability update, but we're about to find out exactly what Bel'Veth is gonna bring to the table, so time to see if the Void Empress is a 200 years champion or perfectly designed. Honestly, this might be the first episode of the series where I'm not exactly sure what the answer will be. For Vex, Zeri, and Renata, it was easy for me to choose a stance. All three of them had a good design. Now I know what you're gonna say, Zeri was turbo crazy OP and stuff, and to that, I want to remind you there's a difference between overloaded and overtuned. Zeri was the latter. Was she outrageously strong? Yes, but her kit at its core had an interesting and thought out design. The numbers just had to be lowered down a bit. When I saw Bel'Veth's gameplay reveal and abilities up close though, I had mixed opinions about the ordeal. See, when it comes to the Void faction and its inhabitants, their idea in terms of gameplay is centered around total obliteration of anything they come across, with an almost obsessive focus on aggression. As per its description, the Void is a manifestation of the unknowable nothingness that lies beyond. It's a force of insatiable hunger. Denizens of the Void realm itself are construct creatures, often of only limited sentience, but tasked with a singular purpose: to usher in total oblivion across Runeterra. It's safe to say that its roster of champions entails a great deal of damage and destruction. Bel'Veth, being the supposed progenitor of the Void, represents that ideology the most. Right out the gate, what I like about her is that she's a very hands-on, or wings-on fighter. Generally, when you think of rulers or boss-type fighters, they like to take a backseat role with their attacks, such as Renata or Swain. At least, that's the impression I had when I saw her prior to her gameplay reveal. She looked like she was going to be a mage or something. And then, when I found out those wings were her literal tools for battle, I was definitely intrigued. Is it getting a little annoying that Riot is releasing yet another skirmisher? Maybe, but Slayers are the most popular category of champions. As mentioned in previous episodes, new champions are characterized by a gimmick of some sort. The latest ones in particular also serve as an answer to an abundance of whatever is running amok on the Rift. For Vex, it was the abundance of mobility. For Zeri, it was the abundance of shields. For Renata, it was the abundance of damage, both DPS and burst. So what's Bel'Veth's gimmick supposed to address? I'm not really sure. She doesn't appear to be conceptualized in the same way as the previous three, which has me a little worried. For someone like Vex, her focal point was obviously doom and gloom, and her gameplay revolved around using it as frequently as possible to disrupt the enemy team. The rest of her abilities, Mistral Ball, Personal Space, and Looming Darkness, presented a variety of ways for you to apply that fear. It was a top-down approach. Bel'Veth's design philosophy, at least based on my initial observation, looks to be more akin to a bottom-up approach, where you create a bunch of abilities and then look to see how they can work with each other in a way that's conducive towards that gimmick. Neither are objectively better than the other, but I'm a bigger fan of the former since it's easier to get carried away by doing a bottom-up. So let's go through her abilities. We have a lot to talk about, and going forward, I'm just gonna call her Bel. Beginning with her passive, Death and Lavender, after using an ability, her next two attacks have increased attack speed. Additionally, whenever she takes down a large monster or champion, she gains permanent bonus attack speed that stacks indefinitely. Okay, so it's a two-parter. The first part is almost a carbon copy of Tarek's Bravado, who also gains bonus attack speed on his next two hits after using an ability. The second part is infinite scaling, which makes her the first champion with infinite scaling since the release of Senna almost 3 years ago. Also, one other thing, Bel's attacks have no attack speed cap, but they do less damage and on-hit effects, and she doesn't gain attack speed on level up. So she has a modified basic attack, although instead of Senna and Jhin who attack slower, she attacks faster. As far as passives go, this is kind of mild. I know it looks like a lot of text, but if you break it down into pieces, it's not the worst, even the infinite scaling part. For all we know, it might only be like 2% bonus attack speed per large monster and 5% per champion kill. That's fine. By the way, I'm writing the script before her actual numbers are revealed, and said numbers are subject to change, of course. I'll have my editor put the descriptions on screen since by the time he starts to work on it, they should be added, but just in case the numbers you see on the video don't match what I'm saying, that's why. Anyways, the one concern I have with their passive is the attack speed. There are a lot of champions who can temporarily attack very fast. For example, Urgot's Purge puts him at a 3.0 attack speed, but his damage and on-hit effects are reduced to roughly a third of their normal values to compensate. That's all well and good for things like lifesteal or crit damage, but when it comes to on-hit stacking, that's where it becomes a problem. Black Cleaver is a core item Urgot players like to run because with Purge, they get full stacks of armor shred in less than 2 seconds. Reason being, each auto applies a full stack since you can't apply half a stack. Same goes for other things like Press the Attack. He can trigger Press the Attack extremely quickly. If Bel has no attack speed cap at base, and judging by her Death by 1,000 Cuts attack style, I'm wondering if they're remembering stack based on hit effects. If hypothetically she can get 10 hits in per second, even if they do reduce damage, she can cap out lethal tempo almost instantly. Fortunately, there is an easy fix. They can add a condition to where only third hits apply an on-hit stack of things like Black Cleaver or Press the Attack. Let's move on though. Next up is her Q, Void Surge. She has access to up to 4 dashes, each traveling in a cardinal direction with their own individual cooldowns. Any enemies she passes through take damage and on-hit effects. Casting aside my personal bias for dashes, I think this is a very creative way to give a champion mobility, provided each one has an appropriate cooldown. But the wiki says the cooldown scales off of attack speed, not regular cooldown reduction, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, since the point of CDR is for the player to sacrifice DPS in favor of more ability usage. We're gonna have to wait until the concrete numbers are out, but based on the distance traveled, it's no further than Fiora's lunge, and its dependence on position means you'll have to dance around your opponent if you want to get all 4 dashes on a single target. The main point behind Void Surge is to give her the 2 follow-up attacks from her passive. W is above and below, which targets an area in a straight line that deals damage and knocks up enemies hit, then slows them after. Right away, this feels like a copy-paste of Red King's W. The secondary effect is that Belle reduces the dash cooldown of whichever direction she casted W. It says reduced, not reset. And based on visuals, it looks like it's only a 0.75 second knockup. But priming a dash in that direction faster would imply it's meant for stick potential. E is Royal Maelstrom, a channeling ability that plants her in place while slashing away at the nearest enemy in an area, during which she gains bonus lifesteal and increased damage reduction, and the damage increases based on missing health. Very reminiscent of Fiddle's Bountiful Harvest, wouldn't you say? Now, there's something about this ability that I find kind of strange. It doesn't feel like the type of skill I would expect to see on someone designed for rushdown. The Skirmisher class is known for having situationally defensive tools, but that's not what Belle's E appears to be doing. She gains damage reduction and heals off of this attack, but I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect in playstyle here. I know what some of you might be saying, Irelia and Master Yi have defensive channels as well. Touché, but both of them are designed to set them up for combo extensions. Irelia's Defiant Dance is primarily used to chunk enemy minions down to a point where Blade Surge can one-shot all of them in one fell swoop. That, and she's a diver. Chances are she's the first one in a fight, so she needs a way to buy time for her teammates to follow up. Master Yi's is the same thing. Meditate can be used to stave off counterattack, but it's also an auto-attack reset, allowing him to continue attacking. I fail to see how Belle's Maelstrom synergizes with the rest of her kit thus far. Skirmishers are not the same as divers, they're better in either front to back or back to front teamfights, not jumping straight into the middle of the enemy team. I'm not saying you can't have an ability that's there for the sake of being there. To some extent, Renata's loyalty program is a filler. They needed her to have some form of actual defense against engage, and that's what they came up with. I can see Royal Maelstrom being a very strong counter against invisibility though. Radius detection moves like Fiddle's W, Katarina's ult, and whatnot can only be activated if there's a targetable entity nearby. Even though you can't see them to click on them, they are still targetable. And skirmishers have a very hard time dealing with their sister class assassins in light of auto attacks consisting of the bulk of their damage, while many assassins have stealth. So from that angle, I guess we can say Belle is a skirmisher who can actually take on the likes of a Kali or a Kha'Zix. Last but not least, and this is going to be a doozy, her ultimate, Endless Banquet with a passive and an active. Passively, she does true damage against every other hit against the same target that stacks infinitely. Okay, remember when I said stack based on hit mechanics? Unless her rapid flurry of attacks only applies on hit stacks every so often, this means she'll be proccing that true damage very frequently, especially with Rage Blade. So that true damage better have really low base numbers if she's gonna have like 6.0 attack speed. As for the stacking part, I know the description says stacking infinitely, but the wording might be misleading. It says it has to be against the same target, which gives me the impression that it's not an infinite scaling mechanic, but rather a ramping mechanic on a target. So the moment she changes opponents, the count resets back to 0. This looks really stupid broken in theory, but in practice, you have to be attacking the same champion for the entirety of a fight. Obviously, this means she's gonna excel in protracted duels or team fights, which is bound to happen with the durability update. For the active component, Belle doesn't actually have an ultimate available right away. What she has is sort of like a Viego passive. When scoring a takedown on an enemy champion or epic monster, they drop a very suspicious piece of candy, as I like to call it, with Rift Herald and Baron dropping an even more suspicious piece of candy. After consuming it, she explodes, dealing true damage to all enemies around her based on missing health while gaining a steroid ultimate kind of like Aatrox or Renekton. You know, those Super Saiyan ults. As far as herself is concerned, she gains increased health, movement speed out of combat, bonus attack range, and attack speed. Also, her Void Surge can dash through walls. So if we go back to her Q, she can't dash through walls normally, which I think balances out having 4. But she has a weird secondary component with it. If she munches on an even more suspicious piece of candy, nearby enemy minions that die revive as voidlings. In other words, she appears to gain Yorick's Maiden passive. The steroid effect is standard issue, we've seen it many times before. The siege component is the reason why I feel like we're starting to get into 200 years territory. Again, I haven't seen the numbers yet, so this is all premature assumption. But what does this have to do with their job as a skirmisher? I understand the function. When you take Rift-Herald or Baron, the next logical step is to push down a lane and get towers. But on a rushdown champion, which is what Belle is, this kind of mechanic feels like they just added it for the sake of adding it. Perhaps one could argue in favor of it by saying she's the Void Empress, she's supposed to have an army of minions doing her bidding, but this isn't conducive to her playstyle. The steroid part is perfectly fine. The ZZ Rod type portion in a vacuum is not a problem, but in the context of her kit, it seems extraneous. So if you're wondering why I'm so hung up about abilities being conducive towards a playstyle, is because that's the #1 cause behind a champion being overloaded. The more properties they have, the wider their power budget has to be split amongst them. If we ever run into a situation where the champion is overperforming, such as having an unreasonably high win rate or the pick and ban rate being too ubiquitous, a simple numbers change like lowering their damage, increasing cooldowns, mana costs, what have you, will no longer be effective at managing their state of health in the meta. For example, Vex, ever since September 23rd of last year, has not received a single buff or nerf aside from a hotfix that lowered her base damage a tiny bit. Why? She doesn't need one. Those small numbers adjustments are the only things keeping her from OP and balanced. Listen, I'm not one to jump on the bandwagon of an ability being overloaded if its description is longer than a grad school dissertation, but I'd be lying if I said that wasn't partially the reason why that happens. Look at Vex's basic abilities. Very simple, they're all just different forms of damage. Therefore, it's very easy to balance her since it comes down to, once again, damage, cooldowns, mana cost, etc. Belle has enough aspects in her kit to raise concern over if she's overloaded or not. Her passive is 2 follow-up attacks, infinite attack speed scaling, no attack speed cap, and modified damage and on-hit effects. A lot of parameters that can be changed in just her passive alone. Her Q is 4 directional dashes that damage and apply on-hit effects, and the cooldown is based on attack speed. Her W is fine. The only thing I see going wrong with this is the cooldown reduction, but since it's reduction and not reset, it should be okay. Her E is damage reduction, lifesteal, and since it's lifesteal, we can assume each of her slashes apply on-hit effects and increase missing health damage, also concerning. And her ultimate has ramping true damage on hit, explosive true damage on takedown, bonus health, range, attack speed, and the ability to summon minions. Inherently, there are a lot of moving parts in her kit, a lot of things that can be tweaked, adjusted, and that makes it harder to balance a champion because it's hard to figure out which of these properties is affecting her the most. Is Belle terrorizing the Rift due to her mobility, her damage, her siege pressure, her resets? We don't know. Be that as it may, I don't want to jump to conclusions and say she's 200 years right away, but she's leaning towards that a lot more than well designed. Granted, I can tell Riot is at least aware of that, considering she has essentially no ultimate until she scores a takedown, which makes her reset mechanic a lot more balanced than Viego's reset mechanic. And in her defense, she doesn't have your usual overloaded mechanics like stealth or untargetability or abusable resets. If you take a look at the clip on screen right now, you'll notice that there are 2 suspicious candies on the ground at the same time, and when she stops to eat one, the other is destroyed, leading me to believe she can't just turbo spam the true damage explosion over and over in the same place. But there are other moments where she can consume one candy after another provided they're far enough away from each other. Once more, I'd like to reiterate that this video is purely speculation based on first impressions. A lot of my assumptions stem from incomplete data and limited information, but first impressions are important for new champions. That aside, I do find the subversion of expectations pretty enticing. Since Belle was titled the Void Empress, I thought she would be closer to Malzahar or Vel'Koz in playstyle, a zoning or control mage, so this looks like it could be a lot of fun. In my previous episode on Renata, I was really worried about the implications of her bailout, but now that she's been out on the Rift for a while, it didn't turn out to be as big of a problem as I thought. I only hope the same will happen for Belle's entire kit. What do you guys think about Belle? Do you believe she's 200 years, or does she seem well designed? I'm gonna give her a tentative 6 out of 10. I like that she's very confrontational and not just to sit back and throw stuff at you champ. I never imagined she would literally slap you to death with her wings, and she seems to be very high risk, high reward with her ultimate and passive, so we'll have to see. For the time being, if you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you could leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other first impressions videos if you haven't yet. But until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.